I'm Beck and welcome to a spoiler-free review of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which is the third Kickstarter book by Brandon Sanderson. Even though it is a Cosmere book, it is a standalone, so you can read this separately to any of his other works, but there are a few references to the Way of Kings and Stormlight books in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter that might pique your interest as you're reading if you are in the know, but if you're not in the know, it won't spoil anything. So as you may have guessed from the title, this book is about Yumi and also Painter. Yumi is a Yokohijo, which is a very traditional role. Her lifestyle is essentially sacred. She is tasked with communing with the spirits to ask for favors, and because she leads this very revered lifestyle that's very traditional, it's kind of institutionalized and it's very isolating, so she feels really lonely. Then we've got Painter, or Nikoro, and his job is to go out and fight against the nightmares that are invading his city. Previously to this job, he was an art student and he had a group of really close friends, but because of a betrayal that we don't know about when we start this book, none of them are talking to him, and so he's kind of a lonely recluse character who's going about his job but not really loving it. Then one day, miraculously, Yumi and Painter connect because they wake up in each other's bodies. When Painter wakes up in Yumi's body though, everyone perceives him still as Yumi while Yumi hovers outside of her body, so she has to instruct him through all of the traditions of being a Yokohijo when he has absolutely no training to do so. Then when they go to sleep, they wake up in the other person's body, so when Yumi wakes up in Nikoro's body, she somehow looks like herself, and people in Nikoro's world are like, where did he go? What is he doing? Is he shirking his duties? And Yumi for once has freedom for the first time in her life. This book was basically like a slice of life story from Brandon Sanderson. And one of the things I liked about it was the interspersings of world building that we got through people's dialogue and also through their interactions with the world. That's how I love seeing things built up. But then we also got narration from Hoid, who is a Cosmere character, and he's kind of the linchpin in the background of a lot of Cosmere stories, but he would come in a lot during this book and just info dump about the world and give you context, and it was very jarring because you're used to reading about Painter and Yumi and then all of a sudden you've got an aside from Hoid. So those brought me out of the story and I just did not like them. They weren't very immersive. It's also not a way that I like being delivered information in a story. A little bit of info dumping is fine, like characters explaining things to you as they go, that is fine to me, and then discussing things in dialogue as if you are already familiar with the world. That's another great way of including your world building and moving your plot forward. But with Hoid's interruptions, they felt like it really didn't add to the story as much as I hoped it would. Hoid's info dumping was also very direct and logical, and it removed you very much from the tone and style of Yumi and Nikoro's more introspective plot development, I suppose, because they're really rediscovering themselves and also figuring out each other's culture and worlds. So while they're in the midst of doing that, you would have an info dump from Hoid and it would remove you from both situations. But then again, I also kind of found Yumi and Nikoro kind of boring as characters anyway. Really, the only wholesome thing that I liked about this character development was actually seeing Yumi flourish outside of her shell and not being forced into being formal and traditional. It was really wholesome to see her being passionate and becoming more of herself. But then I looked at Nikoro and he was just kind of a recluse and a coward, and it was a very similar archetype to the Frugal Wizard story, and I just hate that archetype. So I found Nikoro quite frustrating and just boring, to be honest. Although to be fair, sometimes he would have an interesting aside or a piece of internal or external dialogue and you're like, oh, this is actually interesting. It pertains to his character development, his judgment and the world, and also it's a great conversation with Yumi. But then all of a sudden it wouldn't really conclude anything. He'd be distracted or something would happen or they'd fall asleep and then the scene would change, so you wouldn't get that little nugget developed very far. And I'm like, why aren't I learning more about the world through you? That was a great opportunity, and then it just moved on. It felt like the pace was really off because the first 2/3 were really slow in developing Yumi and Painter, and then the last section, it just kind of sped everything up with the world building, and I didn't get enough of that balance through the first 2/3 in order to be really heavily invested in the last third. And I was like, this balance just feels really off. And if we had more moments in the story that weren't cut off, like I said about Nikaro's perspective. I think I would have more value going into the last part of this book, but I just didn't love it, unfortunately. One thing I thought I would love was the themes and the messaging, so I did kind of like them overall because they're about art, intention, and spirit, which are all fantastic themes, but the way they were conveyed, again, was a bit disjointed and clunky. They were going from direct to internal and introspective, and it wasn't really sprinkled through the story like breadcrumbs. It was more like, oh, here, I'll tear off a piece and throw it here. And it wasn't really seamless, in my opinion. It was also supposed to be a slow burn romance between Yumi and Nikoro, and I can understand why, because they really have to rely on each other and they start as almost enemies, and it's supposed to be like, I guess, an enemies to rivals to lovers story where they learn to trust each other. But Sanderson's romance for me is just not very strong at all. This felt like Yumi and Painter should be more like friends and close allies rather than romantic partners. To me, it just didn't really work in the romance aspect. So what did I rate this story? Not well. I ended up giving it a 2 stars, which is probably evident from the way I've talked about it throughout this video. Like I said, the parts I did like were the world building, but we got snippets of it at the start and end, only for it to kind of under-deliver later on, which is just underwhelming. There was also like a cliche twist in there, and it was supposed to be tense, but I just found it kind of dumb. And then yeah, like I said, in theory, I liked the themes, but the execution of them throughout this story was just very under-delivered for me as well. It was very clunky and I wanted a bit more seamless. I guess if you like the coward to hero character archetype, then you'd potentially like this story, but I just found it really frustrating because not only do I hate that character archetype, I didn't really find Nikoro likable or interesting as a character, and same with Yumi, apart from those wholesome snippets of her discovering her passion. I kind of prefer my characters to have a little bit of self-confidence and get up and go for themselves rather than to be like, oh, I'm such a coward, I'm a recluse and nobody loves me. Like, I hate those self-pitying characters, and that's really what Nikoro was. The only additional good part of this story that I was really passionate about listening to and understanding were the asides of Cosmere world building, mentions of the Stormlight Archive. Those are the only tidbits I was interested in, and then when they were introduced, they weren't discussed or questioned, and then the plot moved right on, and I was like, well, I may as well just reread Stormlight then, because if I want those references, I'll just go directly to the series that gives them to me. So overall, would I recommend this book? Hard no. I gave it 2 stars, like I said. I think I'm standing firm on the fact that the Kickstarter books have just not been my thing. I gave Tressa 3 stars, I gave Frugal Wizard also a 2 stars, and now Yumi is a 2 stars. And you can probably see on my cart here, my to be read cart, that I've got The Sunlit Man also to read, which I'm very nervous about because I thought Yumi being a Cosmere book would make it one of the books that I enjoyed over the other Kickstarters, and I've also given Yumi 2 stars, so now I'm like, well, I give Sunlit Man 2 stars, but at this moment, I feel like the Kickstarter books are just not my cup of tea. What I've learned from this reading experience is just that I need to reread the Stormlight Archive, I think. But thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you have rated Yumi and the Nightmare Painter down below to see if we have similar ratings or if you loved it and why. Thank you again so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.